Hi there, Kate Bora and Fiona Pearman joining you for this week's live as we continue our conversation around power and confidence. And today we want to dig into, why many of us have quite a complicated relationship, not just with the word, but the experience of power, and what can get in the way of us really stepping in and claiming our own personal power and confidence. And the first place we want to start is, this negative association that many of us have with the word and the experience of power. And this might come from, an experience we've had ourselves, or perhaps where we've seen people in positions of power misuse that power. But we often link the word and the experience to dominance, control, high ego, alpha male, selfishness, behaviors that often we might consciously choose to avoid. And often we have this sense or link that power corrupts. So we have, for many of us, we've got a lot of negative connotations, often a lot of values conflicts with our own values and the word and the experience of power. That means we really have quite a negative association and really want to distance ourselves from the word and the experience of power.
Yes, I think the second thing that, which really leads from the first is the quite valid sometimes fear of backlash, fear that asserting myself, fear that being powerful or being seen as powerful will be judged harshly. That, when a woman speaks up, when she goes to claim space, it's sometimes regarded as being too much or too loud or too aggressive. Women who are advocating for things are sometimes seen as difficult. So there's a real tension here for women about wanting to contribute, wanting to land their message, but also finding that asserting themselves is not always welcomed. And I think this sense of it being risky or costly to be visible and powerful means we're worried. We're worried that if I do that, I could end up isolated. I could end up unfairly judged, and I could end up feeling quite excluded. We know that belonging is really important. And so a sense of exclusion is going to mean I'm going to think twice before doing something.
Yeah, I think that leads really nicely. This risk of what's at stake or the fear of backlash means that we often really step into perfectionism and over preparation, right? And so now I've got this formula in my head that seems I need to be 100 or 150% ready or prepared before I step up, speak up, claim a place of power, because I am more likely to be judged and criticized, and I don't want to risk that. So that naturally increases, right? Our strategies to minimize the risk is to increase preparation, right? To minimize the chance of being called out, minimize the chance of getting it wrong. So we tend to step in to perfectionism, and that slows us down and holds us back. And stops us from making good contributions, from, potentially risking overstepping. And I think that's a really critical one because we know, and this is a conversation for a later video, but that actually a lot of power comes from your presence, not just what you know, not from getting it perfect, but how you show up.
Yeah, I think this segues into, our fourth piece here is around all the cultural and social conditioning. And this has been going on since we were really small girls. And there were lots of ways in which we were rewarded and encouraged to be likable, to be humble, to be caring, to be collaborative, which are all great things, but often they feel very counter to standing in your power and to being seen as powerful. We often hear women say, you're expected to be able to lead, but don't be too bold with it. Be confident, but please, make sure you're not intimidating. There's almost like this razor fine line for what's acceptable. And this very much rests in what's expected of us. And we're hardwired with this. We tend to carry it with us for a long time. And when we layer that in with the sense too that, anything I do to share my talent or to let others know how good I am, to stand in my power and let others know, might be seen as boastful. Advocating for myself may not be a positive thing or maybe not be received positively. Again, it's that idea that, I'm going to be judged for something, and that's really be detrimental, and it's not going to lead to a good outcome for myself.
Yeah, I think all really good examples, right, of why we have, a lack of diverse role models. When we think about any women who have been in positions of power, if I think about politics, two really great female leaders, Julia Gillard and Jacinta Ardern, both very different demonstrations of power, both judged really harshly. In fact, if you think about to our point around fear of backlash, can you think about any female leader who hasn't been judged harshly and then contrast that with how we judge male leaders? I think that's really interesting. But, there's not a lot of great examples, firstly, because many leadership examples are still white, male, and traditional, command, control, authoritative. But fewer examples of people doing it differently, like Jacinta Ardern, who came, demonstrating power through empathy, kindness. And so those lack of role models tends to mean that there is a singular view of what power looks like, sounds like, feels like. And that is the consensus. So do it to demonstrate power in any other way, um, particularly if that's your own authentic way, feels unsafe.
Yeah, and I think finally, when we put all these pieces together, we know that there's a whole lot of systemic pressure on women to be a certain way. And so stepping up and into power, pushing against what feels like almost an invisible barrier. It almost feels as though we're not welcome there. Standing in power, being powerful is not something that's okay for women. And that's something that feels as though it operates at a broader level, at that system level. And so overcoming that, it takes a lot of courage and a lot of internal strength to be able to hold myself, even though it feels as though what's around me is not welcoming of me standing and holding my power.
Yeah, some really interesting reflections, right, on why we might have a complicated relationship with the word and the experience of power and what might get in the way of us really stepping into our own power. We're going to leave it there. If you've enjoyed today's confidence conversation, we'd love to hear from you. And of course, we'd love for you to share it with anyone in your network who you think might benefit from it. Head over to our YouTube channel, hit subscribe, hundreds of videos, including our Acts of Confidence alumni talking about the impact of our work and their Acts of Confidence program experience. And if and when you're ready to go deeper with your relationship with core confidence, visit our website, coreconfidence.com.au.